Hey, whoa, lost my voice already. Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Hope you're having a good day. And here we are back with another You Be the Behavior Consultant, our live stream we try to do most Mondays. And we've got another interesting topic for you. This time we're going to talk about our practices when we disseminate information and how we share that information and trying to be really evidence-based as opposed to being just persuasive or markety or all that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be really fun. I'm excited to have you here with me today. Oh, Anne says good evening and hope everyone had a good Easter. Yeah, it was a holiday weekend this week, wasn't it? So everybody was probably out having some fun with family and whatnot. But we're back to the working week, aren't we? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is You Be the Behavior Consultant live stream. I try to do every Monday, as I said. Sometimes we're out of town, so can't always host it. This is how it works. I do present a topic for discussion, and then we do like to be interactive here. I hope this one will be interactive this time. So I'd love to have your experiences and input on consuming information or sharing information. And I do have a few videos, not tons this time. Last week we had so many videos. So if you haven't watched that one, go back and check that one out. And then, of course, we'll recap everything at the end. So as people are logging in here, we've got some of our regulars here. This is what we're going to talk about this time. We're going to talk about how we share information. So sort of our dissemination practices, and it can be all over the place, not just, professional conferences, but also on social media, whether it's, a blog or a PowerPoint or a video, all sorts of things. So there's lots of different ways that we consume information or share information. And so whatever end of it you're on, I was kind of curious about some of the things that you may have experienced or noticed that influence how you receive or how you deliver information that kind of impacts that, how that impacts how you receive information. So maybe you have some experiences with that. And I know these are kind of open-ended questions. So maybe you've participated in a conference, you've written a paper, or you've shared educational information, whether or on social media, or you've just consumed that information. And if you've noticed anything that maybe influences how you receive that information or how that information is received by the people that consume that content. And when you think about it, I'm just going to put this one little slide up here to kind of get you thinking about stuff. When you go back in our history of animal training, it's really evolved over the years, right? For some people who are from countries other than the U.S., this thing on the left here, this dog Lassie was a film star a long time ago in the U.S. named Lassie, and so he was very popular. And as you can see from this little box here, it says that you can learn how to teach your dog how to do the tricks that Lassie did in the television shows, and so maybe that was kind of the way that people got introduced to animal training a long time ago. But now when you look at how some of the resources that we're starting to look at now, we're looking at things like scientific journals. And so here's an article that was recently published by some of the people that you may know that we often talk about here, like Masa Nishimuta and Jesus Rosales Ruiz and Sean Will and Mary Hunter. And so now we're looking at things like peer-reviewed scientific journals as resources for us on animal training. So there's a real difference now in some of the resources that we look at. And so we might look at something like a trick training kit from the 50s or 40s even, very different than how we might look at a resource like a peer-reviewed journal article. So we kind of have some different ways that we might consume the content like that these days. So what are things that you might be looking for? Oh, and of course, Soraya, having worked in the film industry, says in the ethics of TV stars, animal trainers, let me roll this down a little bit. I'm not seeing it very well. Trainers directed to pet animals. Yeah, so it's changed a lot, right? Especially for Soraya, who works in the in the TV and film industry, how they trained animals back then is a lot different than the way you train animals now, right? So you're probably really looking at that information and thinking about, okay, the information that I might get from somebody back then versus the information from somebody now might be very different. Yeah, so you might think about, what are the things that you're looking for? If somebody was giving you information, how might you evaluate that? And Chris says, the trick training kit for goldfish is on the market. Yeah, is it still around? I haven't been able to find it anymore. Actually, I don't know if it's still there, to be honest. I don't know if it's still there. Yeah, so we do have sort of like a wide variety of resources available out there, that we evaluate maybe a little bit differently, and then we have to think about, what are sort of the objectives of those different resources. Mariah says, I saw it years ago, the fish training kit. Yeah, I wonder if they still make it anymore, because I did like the target stick that came from that kit to deliver the food to the fish, and I haven't been able to find that, to purchase it again. I'm going to refresh something here because my one computer is not showing your comments. There we go. For some reason, it wasn't coming up there. Yeah. So what are the things that you look for now? Maybe when you look for resources and information that kind of matter to you, maybe when you consume content. Do you just go with everything and go, oh man, that's awesome, I'm all in, I jump in, I agree with everything they say? or do you have some criteria that makes you go, well, that's okay, or I'm going to think about that one, or what has you on board, or what makes you think, I need to think about it? Any thoughts? I know this one's a little deep, perhaps. Hopefully my stuff is streaming okay here. My one computer seems to be a little picky. Well, I can certainly get the ball rolling if you want me to kind of jump in here with some thoughts. With some things that I kind of have noticed that, okay, here we go. I see something. Streaming okay on your end. Thanks, Ruth. Okay, I don't know what, my computer's giving me some weird issues here. All right, so let me give you a couple that may not stand out for you. Okay, so Al looks at maybe the person delivering the information that might make you think, okay, is this somebody that you already maybe have some trust in? Certainly the source of the info is searchable for the consumer. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up words. Be skeptical is part of the learning game. So maybe using your critical thinking skills, and maybe instead of just automatically accepting what you hear, maybe you kind of do some critical thinking. I think about this all the time now, transitioning from negative to positive training and the equine culture. Yeah. My own biases. Oh yeah. So that's a great one. So I actually do have confirmation bias down here. So maybe I'll skip to that slide right away. So maybe confirmation bias is a good one to think about, because we see that in presentations, right? So if we have, we can have confirmation bias, but also the person presenting or sharing information may have confirmation bias. And we did a whole live stream on this. So that's a good one to consider. So what is confirmation bias? Remember, so confirmation bias is that tendency for us to seek out information that supports the views that we already hold. So maybe the presenter is, has already done that with the information that they're maybe using to support their argument. So maybe they're looking for evidence that already supports pre-existing beliefs, expectations, or hypotheses. So maybe all their literature cited only supports their theory, and so it undervalues evidence that supports any other view that's alternative. And that can lead to cherry picking, right? So cherry picking means that they kind of interpret the science in a way that only supports their views. And so it kind of leads them to say, well, this is evidence-based, but what they've done is they left out all the other science that says, no, that your argument is not valid. And so this can be really tough for us to fight, because you have to have really good critical thinking skills to detect, where's the other science that doesn't support what they're saying. So you have to be careful when someone says this is science-based or evidence-based, because it doesn't mean that it's free from confirmation bias. So that takes a little practice on our part, right? And Soraya says, yeah, it's hard to discover your own biases or blind spots without someone kind of on the outside letting you know. And Patricia says, I have a habit of buying a lot of courses and not finding time to consume them because there's a lot of interest. Yeah, so there can be a lot to consume too. You get sort of overwhelmed with information. Yeah, so confirmation bias is a good one. You guys hit on that one. And so we have to be careful when we also are looking at someone else's material to look for confirmation bias. So that was a good one that you guys picked up on there. Let's see. While you guys are thinking, let's see. And thanks, Alan, for Tower Talk tips. It's helping me a lot. Oh, good. So Soraya's going back to what Al suggested for some stuff that Soraya's working on. Awesome. I'm going to put in one here that maybe, I don't know if people come up with, but just to, continue our conversation here. How about this one? Inflammatory language. Ooh. So this one you might see more maybe in blog posts or social media posts. So this is when we see someone using words that kind of are intended to really get an emotional response or incite action. And an inflammatory question or inflammatory statement would be one which would somehow predispose the listener towards a subject in an unreasonable or prejudiced way. So it misrepresents and exaggerates facts to persuade. It tends to undermine the credibility of the presenter or the content producer, and it just kind of preaches to the choir. And so it tends to alienate those with other viewpoints. And so I tend to think of this more in some of those social media posts that are kind of extreme, so where you see like when somebody might talk about behaviors that, are undesired that we see in animals in zoos. People have labeled it as zoochosis or madness, or the animal's insane. Or we see people talk about, if an animal had to be hand raised or something, it was ripped from its mother, or the animal was fed rotten fish. We see this in some of the situations where maybe it's animal rights versus animal welfare, and you'll see sort of language that's extreme, right? So again, we would call that inflammatory. And again, the intention is to persuade as opposed to being sort of more evidence-based and fact-based. And so when you see those kind of trigger words, and maybe you're reading something and your gut kind of goes, oh, that's making me angry, or that's, that gets me upset. There's a purpose behind it. That's trying to be persuasive to get you to feel a certain way. And so your initial reaction might be very emotional, but if you can take a step back and go, okay, I know what's going on here. This is intentionally trying to get me angry, and it's not really about evidence. It's just about trying to be persuasive. And again, it may not be targeted towards you. It might be targeted towards the people that are already buying into that argument. Also trying to make you feel guilty is a technique often used. Yeah. So again, the language may be, again, targeted to make you feel exactly that way. And that may tie in with something else that we've talked about in the past, which I might bring up here, is propaganda. You remember when we talked about this before, where propaganda also can be about trying to stir up sort of emotional responses, which again might be, but again, to have you take action. So whereas whereas the inflammatory words may be just, persuasive in a way to, get that kind of emotional response. The propaganda usually is trying to get you to adopt certain behaviors and, specific actions. And so that tends to use vivid imagery, emotional videos, moving stories. You might have a presenter that, will cry repeatedly. Now, I'm not saying that some presenters aren't presenting about truly emotional stuff that brings up crying. We had, certainly I've been at recent conferences where in fact somebody's talking about a really sad story that happened to them that was just a factual retelling of an event in their life, and they weren't trying to use propaganda at all. They were just telling a story that happened to them, and it was emotional. But I've also been in situations where people were trying to be persuasive with crying, and it was a little contrived, I would say. And so, there is an intent to persuade there. So you have to be able to decipher when is it a use of propaganda to persuade, and when is somebody just, having a true emotional moment, and just sharing their experience with you. So this is where it's helpful to be able to identify these persuasive tactics as opposed to a true emotional moment for somebody. So it ties in well with the inflammatory language there. All right, you guys got any others before I won't just throw mine out there. I'll let you guys keep thinking about ones that you may have experienced. Let's see. Marketing headlines to get you to click and buy. Yeah, the good old clickbait, right? You guys are tapping into some really important things here, that a lot of this is sort of marketing strategies, isn't it? It's more so this kind of brings us back to what is the agenda here? Is it to persuade, or is it to share evidence-based information? And again, I go back to when we're talking about dissemination of information in the animal training community. I think a lot of us now are really into trying to, find out what's the good evidence-based information so that we can do the best for our animals. And so when we're feeling like it's a persuasion marketing tactic, it starts to make us feel a little uncomfortable. And so it's helpful to understand what the tactics are so that we can feel like we're getting evidence-based information. The word trust, is that what is that? What is that these days? That's a good question. So the clickbait thing is a really interesting strategy, isn't it? That kind of makes me think about, I do have a slide that's kind of about, quote, other practices, and maybe I'll jump ahead to that one. So some of these other persuasion practices that we see sometimes, like modeling behavior. And what I mean by that is if somebody that's kind of on board with a trend, sort of emits behaviors for the group, that they want people to see, to follow, to emulate, and they use it sort of as a means to influence. And Annetta will know the story I'm talking about here, but like if you're in a crowd of people and somebody finishes a presentation and you applaud it, you sort of all feel the need to applaud. You know what I mean? You sort of feel that pressure, like, oh, I should applaud too. And so you model everybody's behavior. And we kind of saw this at a recent conference where when certain people were speak, there was sort of this group of people that would all cheer really loudly. Yeah, that peer pressure. And it felt really weird that there was just these certain groups of people that would cheer really loudly for certain things. And you don't normally see that at conferences. And it felt very kind of contrived and like, making a statement that that this group really wanted everybody to cheer whenever these particular people or names were mentioned. And so they were sort of modeling behavior that I think they wanted everybody to notice. And like you should all be cheering for this too. And so it was very strange. For me at professional conferences, that's just not, something that I would normally see or participate in. Some other things that, we sometimes see is that people kind of gain credentials by, let's see, I'm reading some of your comments. Unfortunately, most people decide based on how they feel about things than deciding about the data or information on the subject at hand. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep. And peer pressure. And Annetta says, yes, that sounds very odd, but felt like manipulation. Well, again, I think it's this is sort of the persuasion tactics. And Annetta says inappropriate is the word for the sort of the weird cheering thing that was going on there. Yeah, I think to me, it's sort of a persuasion tactic. And again, by using sort of this modeling, of saying like, well, we want you to see that we feel this is a way to respond to whenever you hear this name, sort of saying, model our behavior. And gaining credentials by association. And I think we have seen this in our industry that some people that may not have experience in animal training or, have gained credentials just basically by being affiliated or associated with certain names. Another thing, the like button. And what I mean by that is, and this is a marketing strategy. It says that, one of the things they recommend is if you come across as being similar to the person you're trying to sell to, cooperative, if you shower them with compliments, you will be more liked. And that will make it easier for you to sell to that person. That is actually a strategy as a persuasion practice. This was a bit of research on human conformity back in the 50s by Mr. Ash, pertinent to some of these examples. Yeah. So, and honestly, this, stuff that I'm sharing here is stuff that comes from the community that says, how to sell to people. So I mean, we were seeing, unfortunately, seeing these things in the animal training community is a bit concerning, right? It's always made this way by so many years, by so many people. Why you think that something new will work. Mimicry, the mirror effect. Oh yeah, like following somebody else's body language. Yeah. So, but again, I think it's good for us to have an awareness of these things so that, you are, again, you go back to what am I consuming? Am I consuming something because of a tactic, or am I consuming it because of evidence-based information? So, that's the only reason I'm pointing these things out. So something else along these lines, well, again, about our tactics here is, how about taking material out of context? I think you guys would, the mere exposure effect. Yeah. Seeing something over and over again and just, suddenly it becomes like, oh, well, we say this over and over again, therefore it must be okay. I think we did a really good, live stream about the trust account. If you guys want to go back and listen to that one, I think we've heard that phrase over and over again and just said, oh, it's okay. Trust account is a thing and it's a good thing because we've heard it over and over again. But when we did a little, critical thinking on it, we just see it's basically superimposition, and that we have some, we might want to do some more thinking about that in terms of it as a thing to share with people as a way to address the challenges of an animal that is not comfortable with something. I think that's a really good live stream for people to listen to, instead of just repeating, you need to build up more trust. I mean, that doesn't really solve your problem. Okay, so going back to taking material out of context. So when something is out of context, and this one, after going over this, this one was really enlightening for me. When something is out of context, it is lacking or removed from the surrounding words or event that gives something its complete, original, or genuine meaning. Wow, this is so huge. This is deep. In other words, the consumer does not get the whole story, and this can mislead the consumer. And I think my little sleeping lion here probably is something that everybody can relate to. I mean, we've all probably heard somebody say the lion is bored because it's sleeping, right, in the zoo. I'm going to show a little video clip here because there's no audio. But if you were, anyone who knows thing about lions, all we have to do is talk a little bit about their natural history, and we know that a lion in the wild doesn't really do all that much until it needs to. So yeah, they sleep all day. Exactly. So so when someone says a lion is bored just because they're sleeping, that is taking something out of context and adding some information there that is inaccurate. It doesn't tell the whole story. But we could also say that about problem behavior, right? So if I just showed you this video, there could be all sorts of interpretations going on there, right? And the same thing if I just showed you this video. We may see responses that we may think, I don't know if I like these responses. Maybe these are undesired behaviors. But we aren't really able to provide some clear interpretation of what's going on here just by looking at these videos because they're out of context. And so Soraya says, the anthropomorphization route or the polar bear are stereotyping just because it's walking. So when we look at these examples, when we look at a video of a behavior problem, we don't see what happens before or after the behavior is emitted. So we really don't have the data. Yeah. So Ruth says, without some longer term data to go along with the video, we can't really interpret any of those appropriately. So I agree. But it can also be applied to the perfectly trained behavior, right? So sometimes when we just get to see a little snippet of the perfect behavior, it's not telling the whole story either. And I think we also saw that in some presentations at the conference too. And again, sometimes audience members may not have a background with that species or that behavior, and so they may not have enough information to evaluate some of the things that they may be seeing, and maybe somebody's being told that this is success, but there may be more to the story that needs to be shared. So that's a little bit challenging because everything was taken out of context, right? So there may be more there. We already talked about the lion there. And then we've talked about this before, that also, whose video is in the presentation. We see this a lot online where people solicit for videos to use in a presentation because they need content. And so that is a little, kind of weird because it's not really content from the author or work of the author. And even with crediting of whose work it is, sometimes it doesn't, depending on how that person credits it, we don't know if people assume that the person had something to do with it or not. And I've seen it different ways. I've seen some people be absolutely adamant they had nothing to do with the video, that they're not an animal trainer, this is the work of somebody else. And I've seen other people who kind of are, all they do is they put a little notation on the slide, and it's not very clear what their relationship is to the video. So, it can go the extremes there. So I think those are things to keep in mind, which ties into referencing the original source. So this was one that is really, I think, really important. What we see sometimes is that people cite who they first heard something from as opposed to the originator of the material. So what this can result in is citing the messenger and not the originator of the intellectual property. And I gotta say, this is where my heart bleeds for poor Israel Gold Diamond. So this did happen at a recent conference where poor Israel Gold Diamond got dissed, man. So Israel Gold Diamond is, he's a pretty significant pioneer in the world of behavior analysis and behavior psychology. Is, and you can find this bio on the Association of Behavior Analysis International website. He was president of that organization. He's as you can see on this bio here, he's published more than 60 scientific articles. He's the one responsible for the nonlinear contingency analysis information that I presented on at the recent conference that won an award. And I did credit him. But in one presentation, he was not credited for nonlinear contingency analysis. And in fact, and it was also mentioned that nonlinear contingency analysis was not needed, not very important. So I felt really bad about that. And so it's pretty important that we go back to the original source. Patricia says, I read the book on your recommendation and loved it. Yeah, that's great. And that was written by Joe Lang and several other people. I'm sorry, I'd have to bring the book down to get all the names off of it there. But of course, Joe and Paul were students of his. And so they're very, very good about making sure that Israel Gold Diamond gets lots of credit. Awab is on that. And Paul... Trent Codd, sorry. So a lot of good people contributed to that book. So it's really important, especially, when poor Israel's not here anymore, to stand up for his legacy. So that was really difficult that, because the audience there was not one that, would be familiar with him. And it's really important that he gets credit for that. And there was also a social media post about nonlinear contingency analysis in which he did not get credited for that topic. We do need to really do our best to try and remember to reference the original sources. And then sometimes we also see people just repeating information without any citations or references at all, not even necessarily going back to the original source. So it's and again, I'm trying to get better at it myself. I think it's just sort of a practice in the animal training community that we just have not been so good at. And, again, if we can get better at it, hopefully we'll model some good behavior that other people will get in the practice of too. And this one, we've covered this topic before, but it's kind of good to kind of check in on it again. So just some deceptive practices, practices that, can happen is, and again, deception can sound really heavy, but again, these are, just practices that may be sort of even innocently deceptive. So again, we can have misleading arguments, exaggeration, which can go with our inflammatory words, but the casting of doubt is also deceptive. And so this is where I go back to what was said about nonlinear contingency analysis, where somebody said, you don't really need that information. So that was, and that's where Israel Gold Diamond didn't get credited for his discovery. Saying that you don't really need that information was casting doubt on that. And again, this was, done to a pioneer, the work of a pioneer in the field of behavior psychology. So, that was a pretty heavy thing to say. And again, falls under the category of deceptive. And again, omission of information. And this one, again, it may be done innocently because, it could be maybe that the person just hasn't had exposure to the resources and the teachers and the materials. And I think that is something that is still evolving in our community, because we just haven't had a lot of access, right, in the animal training community. We're still trying to connect with all those super cool behavior analysts out there that have so much to share with us. And we're still trying to reach across the aisle there and find so many of them that have such great information to share with us. And so again, this may be unintentional sometimes, but it does maybe put the responsibility on us to dig a little deeper and do some more research and find those sources, instead of just saying, well, I've only got one resource and I'm going to get all my information from that one resource. We kind of have to reach out. I mean, I do a lot of digging to try and find good material to help me, and I ask beyond just the ones that I know. So and what's tough is that the audience doesn't know, what may be missing, and they, and sometimes, they don't know what questions to ask. And, sometimes the credentials that they read on people, they kind of have some holes in them, and they don't know where to look to find out, what's accurate or not. And Annetta says it can be hard to find the original source when it's not shared by the people that present it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Or it can be misleading, like we were talking about when somebody says something's evidence-based, but it's cherry-picked, right? The way that they made the argument that something is evidence-based requires somebody to do some more critical thinking to find out how, what's their argument that this is evidence-based? Was it actually empirically tested, or are they saying it's evidence-based because they use the word positive reinforcement, and positive reinforcement has been shown by the experimental analysis of behavior to be evidence-based? You know what I mean? That's different than the procedure itself is is been empirically tested, and the procedure involves a whole bunch of different, scientific principles merged together, and the procedure has been tested. Maybe the procedure hasn't been tested, but elements of the procedure have been tested separately, and that's what they're referring to as science-based or evidence-based. So these are the critical thinking skills that need to be applied to some of these things that people are talking about, and sometimes that that hasn't been done. And Annetta says, agree with limited exposure to resources. Yeah, so we're in a tough place, as consumers. We're in a tough place to have to try to work our way through some of these things sometimes. Okay, so let's see. I keep jumping around here, you guys, on all these things. And Cynthia says, critical thinking skills are so lacking, but so important. Yeah, it's really hard for us, and and it's kind of asking us to go back to, the things we might have learned back in school, and asking us to sort of keep putting those practices back into our, our lives now that maybe we kind of, haven't used in a while. And we may not have access to, those libraries and stuff. Chris says, if the presenter expresses her opinion and says in its opinion, how is it handled in a presentation? Yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say it's an opinion, or that it's anecdotal, or that this hasn't been tested yet, or this is my hypotheses, and I haven't done any data collection. I think that's fair to say. That I think that's actually a valid way to address something, to say that, you haven't done the data collection yet. This is just a hypothesis that I'm interested in exploring more. I think that's actually a fair way to say something. I like that, actually. Let's see. Yeah, so here's one, we've talked about a little bit before, and this basically has to do with plagiarism, right? So going back to our proper citation and references. So when we talk about plagiarism, we're talking about using words, ideas, information from a source without citing it correctly. And as you guys know, I always, try to add a citation to our GOATS presentations, any courses we put up, even these live streams. And that's basically because I'm trying to make it easy for us to get in the habit of practicing citation. And I try to, when I put these in animaltrainingfundamentals.com, I try to list all the references, all the resources from which I get information to help support these live streams, because I think it's not just a nice thing to do, right? But I think it hurts our industry when we don't properly cite our sources. So when we preserve the foundation upon which knowledge was gained, well, we have a historical record, and that helps with this self-correcting process, right? So, let's say, I think a great example was our open mouth challenge, right? So when I kind of showed you a way to start that behavior, a way that, that I came up with. And then, oh my gosh, look at all the many creative ways people launched from that. And so then we start seeing ways to do it better. And now there's this this launching point, and now we build upon that foundation. That's the whole idea of saying, well, here's where we started, and like here's where we're going to go from there. And so we get this self-correcting process, and it works better when we've kind of built this historical trail. And then for me, I think we demonstrate our industry has a scientific process, and we move from that place where, it was Lassie and the training kit, and we're moving towards that place of having it be having more scientific rigor. And it shows that our knowledge is built upon a strong foundation where we share our experiences and our work, and we become so much more. And I think that's the value of not being plagiarism, where we're just kind of stealing and saying, no, it's mine and it's not hers anymore, and she had nothing to do with it. It's all mine. We start saying, well, hey, we did this together, and we built upon each other's knowledge and experiences to make this something even better and more evidence-based that we're all a part of. And we credited each other for our contributions to it. So, that's the value in that. And just trying to make it easy for us to do that. I'm trying to play my part in that. Oh, and Ruth says loud claps from the back over here. So important. Well, thanks, Ruth. I appreciate you being a part of that. So, for me, agree about the critical thinking is important. Don't just like some posts because of the name of the source without even reading the content. And Ruth says, and not even in a joking way, laugh out loud. No, I hear you. I agree. Yeah, and I think these are not just reserved for professional publications. I think this is something, because of the nature of our industry, or the nature of the world right now, we are sharing information all over the place, whether it's on social media and podcasts and blogs, articles, presentations, etc. The world is just an information sharing machine. So, we need to include this kind of referencing and citation everywhere. Anytime we share stuff. So that's just the way it is. Yeah. And, and Annetta, I think Annetta's really hit on that too with, because there's a lot of posting on social media in which, there's no reference to where did that information come from. It's very frustrating in our field to not have access to a lot of these publications. I agree. And it makes it very hard to actually go back to read the original sources. Yeah, I struggle with that as well. Because, we go to Google Scholar, but not everything is, there's not access, and we certainly can't pay for access. I know some zoos have access to, libraries, but not all of them, and journals. And then, there's some things you can pay for a little bit of access, but they don't, again, it's not to everything. It's challenging, to get access to a lot of journal articles. And, I wish there was a little, and then the ones that you get access to open source may not be really the ones that you really want. It can be really difficult. I agree. Let's see. I think I'm gonna make sure because I jumped around a little bit this time, so I might have skipped a few things here. I hit our other practices. I struggle finding time to read all the stuff I know I should be reading. I know, there's a lot of stuff that comes out. And then again, you have to put your critical thinking skills on when you read some of these. Who was I talking to? Was it Sean Will and Masanishi Muta recently about, I forget where they mentioned it, but they were talking about, how to, it was at the AVASEC conference. They were talking about how to read. It was a really great discussion in their chat, talking about, we did like a little panel discussion at the end, and we were talking about, applying critical thinking skills to reading articles. And they gave a really great discussion about how to read journal articles that they learned from Jesus Rosales Ruiz, so that you can evaluate it. Because just because it's published doesn't mean it's necessarily, a good resource, right? It may not have been great science for various reasons. And so I think the recommendation was to read the methods section first to see if their methods were good methods. So that's a good one. If you, I don't know if Hillary will. This was hosted by Avian Behavior International. I assume she's going to be making the recordings available if you haven't, if you didn't participate. So that might be a fun one to check out if you didn't participate live. Anyway, so let's getting back here. Let's see. So kind of a little bit of overview of some of the things we talked about here. So things we might, want to avoid if we're disseminating information, or look for if we're consuming the content, is inflammatory language, taking material out of context. Did they find the original source? Were there misleading arguments? Was there omission of information? Was there use of propaganda? Was there confirmation bias? Did they use proper citations and references? And here's another one I didn't mention yet, but why was this information shared in this, for, here in this forum, so to speak, at this moment for this audience? And the reason I mention that is because one thing that did happen recently is I did my presentation at a certain conference recently, and on the very same day, somebody posted on that particular topic on social media without reference to Israel Gold Diamond, with no citation, put it that way. And it was very bizarre. It was just really weird that it was posted on the exact same day that I did my presentation on that topic for a very kind of obscure topic. And it just seemed very weird. So it makes you ask, why was that done on that day? So that was weird. And then the following day, that was the day that the presentation was done, where Israel Gold Diamond wasn't credited for nonlinear contingency analysis, and it was also mentioned that you don't really need it. So it was just very strange. Yeah. And then it says, oh yes, very strange, and what a coincidence. So you kind of wonder what the persuasion tactics were, what was the purpose behind those kinds of things, as opposed to, just focus on evidence-based information and, sharing, there's no need for that. And then avoiding deception, purposely misleading, deception by omission, exaggeration, and casting doubt, which, clearly there was some need to cast doubt there for some reason. And checking yourself, questions to consider. If it causes you to pause, think carefully before proceeding. Could this be plagiarism? Did I cite my sources? Did I go far enough back in looking for the original source? Will this action knowingly impact others' works, projects, or presentations? Is this out of context? Are the words used inflammatory, exaggerated, misleading? Is this the right time, place, material for this material to be disseminated? Is it like dropping a bomb, so to speak? What's the intended goal? This at another conference, somebody kind of came in, didn't participate in the conference, and then just presented a presentation that was like really contradictory to everything else that was presented at the conference. And so that kind of stirred up a little bit of, controversy for that particular event, and then they just kind of disappeared and didn't participate, and left kind of people hanging with this back and forth of why that material was kind of out of place with the rest of the information being shared at the event. And so that was kind of strange. Is the material propaganda? Is the material one-sided? Is it missing relevant information? And could there be confirmation bias here? So those are some things to consider when if you're the person maybe putting out the information, because really what it comes back to is we keep coming back to what's the intended goal. Is it really about persuasion? Is it about marketing? Is it, or are we trying to stay on that track of sharing evidence-based information? And hopefully our goal is just trying to share evidence-based information and doing that in a way that is hopefully helpful. And I think, when we, we know these tactics are out there, we see them obviously used in other industries as a way to bring products to the forefront or information to the forefront in a way that, gets them more attention, so to speak. But I think, as we keep moving in a direction that is about trying to be, really evidence-based and try to have animal training become something that, we hope will be integrated in a way that is improving animal welfare as much as possible. And it helps us to kind of keep it in that lane of evidence-based and perhaps moving away from persuasion tactics. So I think with that, I might bring us to my recap slide here. So for me, I think it's exciting to see that animal training is on a pathway towards becoming more respected as a profession and hard science, which is pretty cool. However, to support this, we must also evaluate the way we disseminate and consume information produced by and for this industry. So for this information to be considered valuable, unbiased, evidence-based contact, producers and consumers need to implement checks and balances to ensure that the focus is not on persuasion tactics perhaps, but on sharing quality information so we can all improve our tactics or our practices. Ideally, content producers will self-monitor their own work for common information dissemination challenges before releasing it. However, consumers also have the power to call attention and ask for corrections when materials are not meeting criteria. This can help our industry continue to raise the bar. So hopefully by kind of sharing, what the difference is, this kind of helps put us in a place where we can identify those behaviors when we see them and say, oh, you know what, that's probably fallen in the land of persuasion versus the land of evidence-based, so we can identify those. So Soraya says, great presentation. And Cynthia says, one of the best things about animal training fundamentals and Barbara truly being science-based and encouraging critical thinking. Oh, well, thank you. I'm trying, man. I think it's just, certain experiences and observations, have me thinking about these things is what happens. And Ruth says, absolutely. So just so you guys know, we do have some resources in animaltrainingfundamentals.com if you haven't seen them. We did talk about a more in-depth live stream on propaganda and its impact on the animal training community. And we did do a live stream that's more detailed on confirmation bias. We also have one on deception in the animal training or animal kingdom. And that one was really fun. I really enjoyed that one. And then I do have one that's coming up pretty soon that is about critical thinking skills that really talks about faulty arguments. And this one is actually, it's basically from a guy who specializes in arguments, and so you'll appreciate that one. I think he just basically talks about kind of how to argue and things that are not valid ways of arguing. And let's see. And speaking of citations, here's the citation for this one. And if you got the email, you'll notice that we have the official announcement for the latest global online animal training series coming up. This one is all about training bears for voluntary pill swallowing, but not just bears, but although this is the animal she started with, black bears, but Rachel Hughes from Frank Buck Zoo is also going to be discussing how this could potentially be a great model for training other animals as well. And Ruth says she's looking forward to this one for sure, no doubt. And Annetta says she agrees with Cynthia. I'm so thankful for all the science animal training fundamentals has brought into my world. Thank you for another great Monday. Well, I appreciate all you guys being here. And for anyone who's listening that's not in animaltrainingfundamentals.com, of course, we would love to have you join us. These are our membership options, and we have a monthly individual membership option, an annual one, which provides you a little bit of savings there, about a 20% savings. And then our really popular one is our facility option, where you can have up to 200 individual login options. And so we have a lot of facility members, of course. So that's always one of my favorites. All right, so where's my face? There's my face. All right, and so Annetta says she's really ready for the bear one as well. Yeah, Rachel does some really cool work at Frank Buck Zoo, and so this is going to be a fun one to see. And thanks from Al, and thinking outside the marshmallow. Love the title. Yeah, well, if you read the abstract, it's really about how people generally just try to hide pills in food. And as many of you know, a lot of animals are onto that trick. And so this is really about teaching the animal to swallow a gel cap with medicine in it, and how that can be applied to other animals as well. But of course, this is something she started with the black bears there at Frank Buck Zoo. So yeah, that's going to be a fun one. So it's not till May 22nd, so you got a little bit of time. But those of you that are members, just send me a message. You can respond to an email, or you can send a message through the website to let me know if you want to attend that one, if you're not already on the list. Some of you are, have signed up for all of them, so I'll add you to the list. And if you're not a member, you can sign up a la carte as well and just attend that one on its own if you want to do that. So there you go. We are here next week, so we'll have another new topic for you next week. So please come join us again next week if you want to have some more fun discussing stuff about animal training and behavior. Otherwise, I think it's a great time to let you guys go enjoy the rest of your Monday. And thank you again for hanging out with me, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.